in the promo I sent out, I mentioned some of the work you're doing right now, and I think that's important. And we've kind of the what we've been talking about. The Elizabeth Warren stuff is certainly good news, but the Iran stuff is there's a lot of hope there, and I'm happy to hear that. But it is a bit downbeat. But some of the work you're doing right now is very positive and has a lot of potential, specifically in the research that's going into cannabis right now.
Very much so. I was invited, and of course, when I was in office, I was a maverick, and there was no way that as I left office that I'd be invited to be on any boards. But a year ago, 2 years ago, I was invited to be on a board of Kush as an independent director, and of course, I think they wanted me because of my visibility and cachet. But as they learned, I wasn't just a figurehead. I was very interested in the corporate governance and how they were handling things ethically. And as a result of that, I was promoted within the organization to go beyond the figurehead and became the president and CEO of a subsidiary of our publicly traded company. And since I've been invited to be on another board where I'm chairman of another company, and of course, the future of cannabis and marijuana is just wide open. It's a crime what Richard Nixon did by criminalizing in a big way and increasing the size of the DEA to go after those who are involved with marijuana and hemp. Now, hemp is a very competitive product that would impact the steel industry, would impact DuPont, and a whole host of areas, because hemp has unbelievable qualities for construction. But in addition, hemp, when you squeeze the cannabis oil out of the hemp, it has a lot of CBD, which is a benign product that would help people deal with various health issues. However, the marijuana itself can be very helpful with childhood epilepsy, and just a whole. Now, that the government would be aware that there's anecdotal evidence that marijuana and hemp are beneficial to society, and continue to keep them as Schedule I and illegal as a favor to DuPont and to the pharmaceutical industry is criminal, because people have died who could have been helped with cannabis and with marijuana. And so I now am on this in these organizations. It's CBDS. That's the trading number, CBDS, and what I am bringing to the organization is a focus on the medical. I'm not interested in the pothead community per se. I was not an active user of marijuana or hemp, but I see the value of it, and it's no different than what we were doing as the government with because of our religious leaders. With denying the scientists the ability to investigate stem cells. Can you imagine how ridiculous that was? And we find out how beneficial that is. Well, the reason why we have a drug war is because of Billy Graham in bed with Richard Nixon, who wanted to please Billy Graham and the religious right. And so that's what launched the war on drugs and ruined millions of lives, wasted our treasure. We've wasted over $1 trillion on this war on prohibition. Now, prohibition against alcohol didn't work. You'd think that we would be smart enough to recognize, well, that didn't work. Why are we doing it with a prohibition on drugs? And, of course, the prohibition on drugs does not extend to the pharmaceuticals. I take CBD marijuana because I have neuropathy in my feet and I have all of my discs in my back out of joint. And so I take it for the pain. And I haven't had to take a pain pill since last February because I take one little eyedropper full at night to control the pain. Now that's beneficial, and there's no side effects. There were side effects to the pain pills I was taking, and here again, the war on drugs is nothing but a subsidy to the pharmaceutical industry and to the idiot far-right community, which thinks that marijuana is harmful and a gateway drug, and it is neither. Now, like alcohol, it can be taken to excess, but it doesn't have the same negative effects on the body that alcohol has. Because alcohol can be addictive, marijuana has proven not to be.
You know, there was a DVD I watched a few years ago called, and I was looking for it actually while you were talking. It's What If Cannabis Cured Cancer? And a friend of mine had gotten it and sent it to me, and I sort of chuckled with him and said, okay, I imagine it's going to be a bunch of hippies who sitting around and talking about, and with their pupils dilated, talking about how great this is and how it mellows them out and all this. But I watched this DVD, and you can actually watch it. I see here you can watch it for free on YouTube, and I recommend that people watch this because it's physicians, it's scientists, it's university academics, it is highly intelligent people who are having this discussion about how that this is out there and the studies that they've done on this and how it affects, for example, apparently it affects, there are constituents in it that affect how your neurons in your body speak to each other. And it also will even tell cancer cells and cells that are going crazy in your body will help correct those cancer cells. And these are scientists who are studying this. So it really is. It's criminal when you think about it. The fact that that here now the only thing standing in the way really is you have Washington, you have the federal government. Why do you think, Senator Gravel, the federal government is still so invested in this notion that that marijuana, you think of these movies from the 60s, right, Reefer Madness and things, that it destroys communities and turns women into sluts and all of this other stuff. Why are they still in 2015 so invested in this?
Well, they're invested in a lie. That's the first thing. And why they continue is, first off, you got to keep in mind who are supporting. The people supporting it are the pharmaceutical industry. Make no mistake, if there's going to be deregulation or the end of prohibition, the pharmaceutical industry wants to get into a position to control because that's what they do. They do drugs, and they're calling marijuana a drug, and it is to a degree. It's a beneficial drug, and so they want to control it. Now, with respect, there are other people that are very sincere that say, well, I don't want my kids to get any access to marijuana because all the states that have passed legislation, you got to be 21 or older. It's nothing lower than 21 to have access to marijuana. Well, that caveat disturbs a lot of people. And these people basically have it from a religious point of view that this is bad. So you couple the fact that you've got some far-right crazies, you've got the pharmaceutical industry that really wants to get control of it, and of course the changes that are taking place at the local level. And at the local level, they're trying to fight to keep it locally owned. And so that flies in the face of the pharmaceutical industry's interest in controlling the whole area. It's an interesting phenomenon that's occurring. It's not unlike what happened with the giving the women the right to vote. In 1920, the Congress passed the necessary resolution bringing about a constitutional amendment. And, of course, they did this because more than 20 states had already given the women the right to vote. And at that point, Woodrow Wilson was sick and his wife was making the decisions. and she's the one that made the decision to no longer fight the giving the women the right to vote. Now, keep in mind, the agency or the institution that was fighting the women's right to vote and had been successfully fighting it for 50 years was the alcohol institution, because the women's right to vote suffragette joined with the temperance union to outlaw alcohol. And so the alcohol industry was the one that was fighting primarily in opposing the women's right to vote. So had they not joined forces with the temperance union, women probably would have got the right to vote 50 years earlier than they actually did. And that was a tactical tragedy. But the alcohol industry was right in fighting them, because no sooner did women get the right to vote than we passed the 18th Amendment outlawing alcohol. And what a terrible experiment that was to the nation. All it did was strengthen the violent elements of our society, just as the prohibition of marijuana is. And we need to do the same thing, basically, that's been done in Portugal, and that is to stop the entire prohibition of drugs. If a person has a cocaine habit, do what you do in Switzerland. Go to a doctor and get a prescription. I have a habit of suffering pain, so I can get a prescription for a drug, be it codeine, be it heroin. I could get a prescription for that if my doctor felt that was necessary to alleviate my pain. So what's the difference between getting a prescription for me now and getting a prescription later, when it's the doctor that's in charge of the drug, not the pharmaceutical company or the government? It just gives you an idea how twisted our structure of governance can become in this regard. I'm hopeful that as we progress from state to state by initiative, and it's a tough way to do it because you're going to have different rules in Washington, different rules in Colorado, different in California, and in other states. Over 30 states now have medical marijuana. Well, that's one step away from the recreational. And my take on it will be that once the prohibition is gone, you're going to have a medical involvement that does not exist. In fact, rather than try to tax the marijuana industry out of existence, which Washington State is doing, and to some degree in Colorado, what we need is to realize that the taxes that come from marijuana production and use should go to pay for more research in this area, which has been denied all along, and also to pay to educate doctors so that the doctors become authorities through their continuing education program on the prescribing elements of marijuana and cannabis. So there's a great future, and it will liberate. Here again, you can look at what are the other organizations that are supporting the prohibition. Well, the Prison Guard Union has been supporting the prohibition. The Republican Party has been supporting prohibition. Now, these things are going to diminish, and eventually we'll get a handle on it, but not without. And one of the elements that should take place in legislation is that anybody who's been convicted of possession, not distribution, but mere possession of a certain quantity, should not be continued to be in jail for 5-10 years. These are people that didn't commit a crime. They didn't obey bad law, but that may not be a crime. And if we make it legal today, then what do we say to the people that are in jail who don't experience the benefit of that new wisdom in the community? So I think you're going to see a change in that regard too, which will lower the cost of government, because I forget what state. One state has just cut the education budget and increased the prison budget. Now
Maryland.
Maryland.
Maryland is doing that.
Yeah. Well, it's idiotic because it costs more to put somebody in prison rather than give them an education. And this is part of the shortcoming of American governance at this point in our history.
Talking earlier before the show, Senator Gravelle, you were talking about how, I forgot which one, was it Washington State, how Washington State has gone about this the wrong way. What is the wrong way, and more importantly, what's the right way to go about decriminalizing cannabis?
Well, first off, the right way would be to follow the leadership of Portugal, which is a conservative Catholic country. And they deregulated, they decriminalized everything. After a number of years under dictator Salazar, the people just got fed up and went crazy liberal and deregulated everything. And then when the conservatives got back in power, they realized that the deregulation or the end of prohibition brought about a decline in drug use and brought about a decline in crime. And so the conservative government of Portugal continues the policies of the extreme liberals because of its effectiveness. And what we see now in the various states where we have any kind of data, it decreases crime and it decreases use. And we see the same thing in Switzerland and we see the same thing in the Netherlands. And so here too, we've got to be able to treat addiction as a health problem. And as a result of that, to use the taxes that come from the industry to improve the quality of the health care we give to addicts. That's what they do in the Netherlands. That's what they do in Switzerland. And we should take a page from that book. It would be so much more mature than the stupid and idiotic process we have today, where we empower the criminal element in our society. When mothers say, well, I want to keep the drugs away from my kids, well, my answer to that is you can go to any high school right now and you can get as many drugs as you want. So we're not doing a very good job of keeping drugs away from your kids. Now, maybe what we ought to do is regulate it, decriminalize it, and regulate it so that we can prevent the drugs going into our school system the way they are now through the leadership of the criminal elements. And of course, what helps that is, like in Washington, they tax the cannabis and marijuana so heavily that it makes more sense to buy it illegally, because all they got to do is drop the price on the street below what the government is forcing the industry to pay, and you continue to have a criminal element involved in this. So the best way to deal with this is to tax cannabis and marijuana no different than the way we tax wine and beer. It's essentially the same thing. You can drink enough beer to get quite a buzz and get very drunk. And you can do the same thing with wine. Well, and you can get a lot drunker on wine and beer than you can on cannabis. So I would hope that we would take a page from that book and tax cannabis no differently than we tax wine and beer, and take the money and put it into research and put it into to treatment of addiction, and not put it into education, not put it into the defense budget. Because when you say, oh, we'll tax cannabis and we'll be able to cut the budget in education or elsewhere, I got to tell you, that's not the way it happens. Money in government is fungible.
If people want to learn more about these companies that you're working with right now, what were the name of the companies again, and do they have any websites?
Yes, we do. We have Cannabis Sativa Inc., which has a website and which is publicly traded. It's traded as CBDS. And so I belong to that organization. I belong to THC Pharmaceuticals Inc., and that, of course, is a traded CBDG. So these
CannabisSativaInc.com. Yes, that's the website.
Right. And there'll be a lot of, as we go through this difficult way of bringing about national legislation, which is to do away with prohibition, that will shake itself out as we go from state to state. If the state of California passes an initiative that addresses the problems of medical and recreational, I think you'll find that will be the tipping point for a national legislation that will deal with the problem, because the position taken by the government can no longer logically be sustained. It just makes no sense at all, and that's where the change is coming willy-nilly by the people, sometimes with a hatchet and sometimes with a scalpel, through the initiative process. And as you know, I've been deeply involved with the initiative process, trying to bring about a national initiative whereby people could make laws at the federal level as they do at the state level in 23 communities. But what you need, both with marijuana and with the initiative process, you need universal language that applies to all fairly. And that's, of course, not what the process that's going on today. But the process that's going on today shows that government is off track and the people are taking responsibility on their own through the initiative process to correct this ridiculous posture of prohibition against drugs.